Hi, thanks for your interest in our work. My name is Grace Yan. I'm recording this video from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. In this video, I will be talking about Decipher, an interactive visualization tool for interpreting unstructured design feedback from multiple providers. This work is done in part of my internship with Adobe. And my co-authors include Joy Kim from Adobe Research and Brian Bailey from University of Illinois. Imagine that you're a designer and just created a flyer on the left. I want you to think about how would you interpret and act on the feedback on the right. If you read the reviewer one, you will think that the current layout was quite good because the person said there's a clear hierarchy of information. But wait, in reviewer 2, he said there's no emphasis in any of the information given. If you're moving on, you will see that the reviewer 1 doesn't like the color, but the reviewer 3 thinks the color palette is excellent. All the reviewers are professional designers, so how would you interpret and act on the feedback? Interpreting feedback for creative work is hard, especially when it involves resolving contradictions between people, judging the credibility of the source, and prioritize different issues that are raised. One way to address the issue is to improve the quality of the feedback. Improving feedback quality is typically done on individual pieces of feedback. For example, by asking the providers to follow rubrics or use templates while writing their feedback. But when the designers look at the feedback in aggregate, it doesn't necessarily address the issue that people have different opinions, focus on different topics, and probably contradict with each other. Another approach we can take from the designer's perspective is to enhance engagement. To do that, prior work has prompted the designers to perform reflection, to write action plan, or to perform coping activities after reading feedback. However, most of the tasks are done on raw text. It might be hard for a designer to read through all the feedback content and still remember the different topics and different opinions that are raised by different people. A third method we can take is in between these two threads of work, which is to use information visualization. Visualization has been used to display online comments, to facilitate decision-making, and to summarize crowd feedback. But these visualizations typically do not include information about individual feedback providers, which is critical when interpreting creative feedback. Our work contributes a new tool for supporting the interpretation of multiple pieces of unstructured feedback. We also provide empirical evidence of how different representations of the feedback would affect making sense of that content. Decipher is a web application that visually structures a feedback set by topic and provider. It also represents the sentiment patterns across the two dimensions. The way that we create this visualization is through the use of metadata, which we collected through an offline labeling process. Please refer to our paper for how we accomplish it. Now, I will show you a demo. In this demo, the designer received feedback from 8 reviewers and imported it into Decipher. Decipher breaks each piece of feedback into units of text and categorizes them based on its topic and sentiment. We use field circles to represent a reviewer's feedback regarding one topic and color-coded the circles to indicate the sentiment of the feedback unit. Pink circles represent negative statements. Green indicate positive, and blue is for neutral tone suggestions. Each column shows all the feedback units from one reviewer, while each row shows all the feedback units regarding one topic. To read the feedback content, click the plus button to expand the row and hover over each circle to read the feedback content. For your future convenience, you can mark each feedback unit using one of the 4 labels: important, keep in mind, not sure, and disagree. To revisit the feedback units that you marked, use the Show Only panel to filter the feedback. You can also use search box to do keyword search. To do this, type a keyword in the search box, and the tool will highlight all the feedback units that contains the words. You can also combine the use of keyword search and action marks. The design of Decipher was informed by a formative study where we interviewed 10 expert designers to understand their current strategies to organize and manage feedback received from multiple providers. Please refer to our paper for the results of the formative study. Using the visualization, the designer can quickly find the strengths and weaknesses of different aspects of the design. They can also compare opinions between providers without having to read the content itself. For example, using column-wise comparison, we can see that provider 1 is in general more negative than provider 2. Through row-wise comparison, we can also see that the font issue is almost mentioned by all the providers. So the research question was, how does representation of feedback set using visualizations versus raw text affect its interpretation? To answer this question, we conducted a within-subject study with 20 participants who had little or no knowledge in design. In this study, the participants completed feedback interpretation tasks using 2 representations, one using Decipher visualization and the other using raw text in Google Doc. In each task, the participants would first review a flyer we prepared for them. Here I show one of the flyers. The participants would then use the Assign tool to review a set of feedback. The feedback was provided by 8 professional designers, and the feedback was preloaded into both tools. The 2 sets of feedback contain roughly the same number of words and cover similar topics. Once the participants finish reviewing the feedback, we ask them to answer 3 questions based on the feedback they just reviewed. The questions include identify key issues and strengths in the design, locate specific suggestions, and find contradictions between the providers. We chose these questions because these are common feedback interpretation tasks. We collected 3 measures in the study. First, we observed and analyzed the participants' strategies for interpreting feedback using both tools. We also analyzed the responses given to the feedback interpretation questions. To do this, we recruited 3 experts to complete the same task that our novice participants did. We then compare their answers to each participant and see how well our novice participants were able to discover the same issues identified by our experts. At the end of the study, we asked our participants to complete an exit survey where they compare their user experience using Decipher and Google Document for performing these feedback interpretation tasks. The questions included which tool would they prefer to use in the future for reviewing feedback from multiple providers. We also asked them to answer which tool make it easier to identify critical issues and comprehend feedback. In the end, we also asked them to compare which tool make them feel overwhelmed during the task. According to the exit survey, 16 out of 20 participants prefer to use Decipher over Google Document in the future for reviewing feedback from multiple providers. The participants reported that Decipher made it easier to identify critical issues in the given data set. We checked the time our participants used to complete a task using Decipher and Google Document and found that they used similar amount of time either reading the feedback or answering the questions. But when being asked which tool made them feel overwhelmed, 13 participants chose Google Document, which was exciting because that means Decipher did not decrease the participants' engagement with the feedback, but at the same time reduces the sense of being overwhelmed due to the amount of feedback they were given. In the interview, participants reported being able to process feedback in shorter and more focused segments in Decipher condition. One participant explained that the good thing about Decipher is that for each feedback, you're just reading 1 or 2 sentences at a time. You won't feel overwhelmed when looking at 2 sentences compared to a 5-6 sentence long paragraph. 14 participants also reported using the color-coded sentiment patterns in Decipher to determine topic importance, with one participant explained that, I can see at a glance where most of the negative feedback was, making it easier to note the typography issues than reading through all the feedback. Now I will talk about some limitations in our work. First, our participants were provided with existing graphic designs and feedback. We imagined that the participants might react differently if they were interpreting feedback on their own work. For example, they might be more surprised to see contradictions. Future work is needed to test how emotional responses might affect the interpretation of feedback. Second, in a comparative study, the feedback in the Decipher condition was pre-annotated so that our participants can focus on reviewing feedback in the visualization. In practice, the designers would need to perform this step by themselves. Future work is needed to test the possible value of annotating the feedback relative to the cost of performing it. Finally, the participants in our study did not actually revise the design. Future work is needed to monitor if and how the interpretation of feedback changed over the entire revision process. In conclusion, we created a new genre of tools and design features for aiding feedback interpretation. We also provided empirical results showing how different representations of design feedback affect sense-making. We also identified the key strategies and criteria the expert designers perform and leverage to interpret the feedback. For future work, we want to see how my designers use Decipher at different project stages and for different kinds of creative work. We also want to expand our visualizations to see how the strengths and weaknesses of a project evolve with iterations. Finally, we want to scale our tool for large collections of feedback and implement new features to help with preparing the revision plan. Thanks for your listening.